Perfect.
We are recording.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I wanted to have a presentation on how to complete the NIH human subjects and clinical trial information. As a lot of TRANSCEND applicants and other researchers are working on NIH grants and human subjects projects, they might encounter having to fill out this information, and thought it'd be a great opportunity to go through it and just give some high-level tips, tricks, and how to complete this information. We'll have time at the end for questions, so please just hold your questions until the end, just so we have enough time to get through the presentation and make sure we cover all topics. This presentation, like Mark said, is being recorded. It will be available on the TRANSCEND website in the next few days. So if you aren't able to stay the whole time, you want to reference it, or you have colleagues that might benefit from this training, feel free to share the location with them, then they can watch it on their own time. Just some background information. My name is Miranda Lighthizer. I am a project manager with Sanford Research, as well as one of the core coordinators for the TRANSCEND Research Design, Compliance, and Data Management Core. All right, to get started here, there are several ways to complete this information and to upload it and share it with NIH for your grant. This is very contingent upon your institution, how you are applying for the NIH-funded grant mechanism. You can fill it out electronically through the Assist or grants.gov workspace. These are online portals where you can create an account. You can go in and upload this information. You can also fill it out through PDF paper submissions, which is how TRANSCEND does this process. So going into this presentation, I'm really going to focus on the paper process. However, a lot of the information, the attachments, everything is very similar. It's just whether you attach it to a PDF document or you directly upload it to a web-based application. You can also fill this paperwork out via an institutional solutions system, but I would always advise that you connect with your institutional grants office to identify what your institution's process is and what the correct process is for the grant mechanism you are applying for. So just so you know what it looks like, this is an electronic version of filling out this information paperwork. This was through the Assist platform. So you can see on here, you would have an Assist account. You'd go in and you'd fill out the human subjects and clinical trial information. It'll ask you questions on, are human subjects involved? Is it exempt? And then as you work through this information, you can see that you will attach certain documents that detail all of the information you will be giving the grant funding agency, NIH, on your project. Now, if you're completing this paperwork for TRANSCEND specifically, you'll fill out the PDF form. This form looks like this. It asks the exact same questions as what you would fill out on an electronic version. So, is human subjects involved? Do you have an exemption? And then you can see over here, there's the attachments, the same attachment documents that you'd attach any other way. I really want to go into what to consider when you are getting ready to start this paperwork or as you are working on this paperwork. A large one is timing, depending on the grant process you are applying for. So for TRANSCEND, you're going to fill this paperwork out before your project is submitted to NIH, but after you receive IRB approval. That's not always the case. Sometimes you'll fill this paperwork out before you get IRB approval. So I would always reference at what time point do you need to fill this paperwork out compared to other components of your project, specifically IRB approval, because as you are filling this information out, a lot of the information you put into this paperwork is the same information you put into your IRB applications, protocols, and that you get IRB approval on. So it makes sense to either wait until you have IRB approval, if that needs to come first. Then a lot of this information can be copy and pasted over. If you complete it before IRB approval, then you'll fill this information out and make sure when you're getting IRB approval, you reference what you put in this paperwork. So that way they can match as closely as possible. Drafting. I kind of went over this, but how you gather the information included in this paperwork. you'll put the information in this paperwork that you put into your grant, what you are detailing in your grant application, as well as the human subjects components you are putting into your protocol and your IRB approvals. So you'll want to make sure that they have the same information, that you're not changing what you put in one document from another. Obviously, you'll have to determine, does your project involve human subjects? If you don't have IRB approval before completing this paperwork, you'll have to make that determination. Are you involving humans in your research? Yes or no? Are you involving components of humans in your research, such as specimens or data? You'll also have to think about, is this identifiable information or de-identifiable information for you and your research team? You'll have to identify if your project is an applicable clinical trial, an ACT, or not. There are several different ways you can determine if your project is an applicable clinical trial or not. Some institutions give you a way to determine if your project is an applicable clinical trial by answering several questions. Otherwise, on the paperwork itself, it also gives you 4 questions you need to answer to determine if you have an applicable clinical trial or not. If you have an applicable clinical trial, you'll have to fill out an additional part of this paperwork, where if you don't, then you can skip that section. I'll go into more detail on that later too. You'll have to determine if your project has any exemptions. I do have information on that. You will have to identify how it is listed on your grant application, who is listed on your grant application, my apologies, versus just a study team. So you'll have to determine who are all the key personnel on your grant versus who's a study team member that's not listed on your grant. Is your project multi-site? So are you enrolling human participants at multiple sites, not just one? And then similarly, if it's an electronic version, I think these questions are included. We can disregard that. So going into exemptions, here's how you can identify if you meet one of the 8 exemptions that you would have to list on your paperwork. I'm not going to go into details on this. You can reference this. There is also references at the end if you need further information on the different exemptions and if you do or do not meet one of them. But there are 8 different ones that you could potentially meet. In this paperwork, you have to provide information on your enrollment reports. There is a planned and then there is an actual table. Initially, when you're filling this paperwork out to be sent to NIH for your grant application, you only have to complete your planned. Now, you'll know how many participants you're wanting to enroll to your trial, but you won't know what the makeup in terms of racial categories will be within there. So it's kind of a guessing game to determine what you think the makeup of your enrollment will be. Then you will complete the cumulative actual table whenever you complete your annual RPPR, your annual progress report. You'll fill in the table of your actual racial categories and makeup for what you have enrolled. You'll also complete this at the end of your study if you have to provide a final progress report. So you could end up completing this accumulative table multiple times, and you'll just keep adding up what your total enrollments are. I'm going to run through 7 attachments that you go through in this paperwork. These are typically always needed attachments. There are additional attachments that you complete if you have an applicable clinical trial, if you have FDA-regulated components. They're not always required, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. If you encounter one of those additional attachments, happy to go into depth with you on that separately. So we'll go through the inclusion of individuals across the lifespan, inclusion of women and minorities, recruitment and retention plan, your study timeline, protection of human subjects, data and safety monitoring plan, and the overall structure of the study team. So the first attachment is the inclusion of individuals across the lifespan. This is a pretty easy document to complete. These are all of these attachments that you will upload to this information. You will likely complete it as a Word document, and then when you upload it to either the web application or the PDF file, I would save these as PDFs before you attach them. So for example here, you can see that the inclusion of individuals across the lifespan, you just need to discuss the age group of individuals you are including in the study, if a population is included, or if they are not included, and why. This does not have to be a full page. It just has to be a short description. It can even just be 1 or 2 sentences stating children are not included in the study due to their low prevalence of cancer diagnosis that meet the inclusion criteria. All other ages are being included. Obviously, it'll go into more detail if you have very specific inclusion criteria. Inclusion of women and minorities. Just like it says, this is a document detailing why women or men would not be included, as well as considerations for racial, ethnicity, or gender and age. So you'll just detail if or if not women and minorities are included in your trial, and then why you are including them or excluding other groups. This might be a long document, it might not be, depending on what your trial is looking at doing. Recruitment and retention plan. So this document is detailing how you are going to find and recruit the participants for your human subject studies. So examples, if you're putting flyers into the public, if you are recruiting from hospital schedules, if you are doing phone calls to recruit participants, you'll go into the plan that you anticipate using for recruiting the individuals for your study. You'll want to include details if you think you'll have issues recruiting, and how do you think you'll address those. You'll also want to consider how you will make every effort to keep the participants involved with your research project. So how are you going to retain them on the study? Are you going to offer incentives? Are you going to continually stay in communication with them? You'll want to include all of that information here. Study timeline. This one can be very different depending on your type of study. You'll want to think of the reasonable timeframes to complete milestones of your project. So how long do you think it'll take to recruit? What study activities will your participants have to follow? When will the study be done? And you can even include information about data analysis and dissemination. The format is not as important as having reasonable timelines and expectations, and make sure you detail those explicitly. Simple can be better to not get yourself into a pickle if you make unreasonable timeframes. However, you can be as detailed as you think appropriately needed for your grant submission in your project. I provided a couple of different examples here. You can do a table, you can do a flow chart, or you can just simply put in terms of 1 through 6 when you think things will occur and how long they will take on your project. Protection of human subjects. This will be the longest and most detailed document for this paperwork. Things you'll want to consider: the study design and procedures of your study. What are you going to ask the human subjects to do? What procedures are they doing? What is the design of your study? You'll want to consider the participants' risks and how you will alleviate those. What risks could they experience from this? With that, you'll also want to consider what is the participant and societal benefits of your project. Are you going to give compensation to the participants? Are they going to get return of results from this study? All of this information will need to be taken into consideration and detailed in this document. You want to consider the study populations that might be vulnerable. So children, pregnant women, prisoners, all of those vulnerable populations that could be involved in your project, and how you are going to take their risks and considerations into your project. Consider all the data being recorded, collected, and stored, even if you're using it for future research. What data are you collecting? How are you recording it? Where are you storing it? Is it in a safe environment to store it? Is it identifiable, de-identifiable? Who all has access to this data? Are you sharing it with a repository or any outside members of the study team? You'll want to consider how you are consenting or assenting if you have children, the methods, the timing, the location. Are you including non-English speakers? If so, are you going to ensure you have those translated consents and assents? And then if consent is ever withdrawn, what procedures will go into play with that? Will you keep the participants' data and or specimens or whatever human subjects components? Will it be discarded? Go into details there. And then consider any importance or significance of the study. Why is this study important for the human subjects participating? What is the significance of the study in doing it with human subjects? Again, this will be the longest and most detailed document you fill out for this information. A lot of this can be taken from your IRB approval if you have that already. A lot of it is information the IRB looks for and asks for while they're also reviewing projects. Data and safety monitoring. So your project may or may not require a formal data and safety monitoring plan. It might also approval, and depending on the risks or the minimal risks, you'll likely need a data and safety monitoring formal plan that you also submit to your IRB. Sometimes that is not required. If it is required, you can pull a lot of the same information for this attachment for your paperwork. Are there any safety concerns that could arise during your project and how you are going to address and reduce those risks? Primarily adverse events or serious adverse events. You likely went into details on this in the previous attachment in protection of human subjects, but you'll again detail it here. And you might even go into more detail in this attachment. You'll want to detail how are you ensuring the safety of the data for your participants? Is any PHI involved in your project, and how are you maintaining safety for that PHI? There's a couple of different examples here. So if you have a data and safety monitoring plan, you give an overview, the risks, and then your plan for that. And then the overall structure of the study team. This is when you need to identify who is listed as a key personnel on your grant versus who's just a study team member that is not involved in the grant application, but will help with your research project. On this document, you only need to list those who are a key personnel. You don't need to go into detail of any other study team members who are not listed on the grant as key personnel. You'll want to detail what their involvement and contributions will be on the project. What is their background, training, and qualifications to do so and be on the study team? You'll want to do this for every key personnel listed on your project, as well as if you are the PI of that grant, you'll also want to list yourself. So section 4 of this paperwork, and I'll show this paperwork when I'm done with the presentation too. Section 4 is titled the Protocol Synopsis. This is the section that you only need to complete if you have an applicable clinical trial. It'll ask you information about your intervention. So you need to include a table for each intervention if you have multiple intervention arms. So if you have different doses of a drug, if you have a different time frame for each arm of the study, you'll even have to include an arm if you have a control of your study. So if your study is an applicable clinical trial that is evaluating the safety of different drug doses, you'll have an intervention for each of the drugs, each of their doses, as well as a control arm. You'll want to consider the phase of the study, the model, is it blinded or open, and is it randomized? You'll want to consider, is the intervention FDA regulated or an ACT under the FAAA? If so, you'll have additional documents to attach, such as your statistical design and power, the IP, IND, or IDE, so investigational product, investigational new drug, or investigational device. You'll also have to include information on your dissemination plan from that. Again, this last section on protocol synopsis does not always have to be completed. It is only if you have an applicable clinical trial. Resources. There are lots of resources after this training. Feel free to reach out to myself or Jamie Scholl. She's also on this meeting and her information is here. I've included 2 links to the NIH site that you can use to help you figure out this information, as well as this training that will be available on the website. So before I go into the actual PDF paperwork and kind of walk through it step by step how you complete it, what questions do you guys have for me? Okay, while you guys are thinking, if you have any questions, I'm going to pull up the PDF paperwork. Again, this paperwork looks very similar to if you're doing it on an electronic version, so don't feel like it's not applicable or does not cross over. Mark, can you see my screen? Okay, perfect. So when you're completing this via PDF paperwork, which is how you will do this for the TRANSCEND grant applications, you'll have two PDFs actually that you'll have to merge. You have the PHS human subjects and clinical trial information. This is essentially the main document that you will attach your study records to. So as you're working through this, the very first question it asks you, does your application involve human specimens or data? If yes, then you'll have to provide an explanation if it is or is not considered human subjects research. Now, if you have IRB determination that this is not human subjects research, you can provide that here, as well as a justification on the specimens and the data is all completely de-identified or whatever made it not human subjects. If it is considered human subjects research and you have specimens or data involved, then you don't have to provide an attachment here, and you can just move on. You'll then answer these questions. Are human subjects involved? Yes or no. Is the project exempt from federal regulations? That is these 8 that I showed you previously. If yes, you'll choose which one is applicable. If no, then you'll just choose no and continue on. So you will complete this paperwork regardless if your project is or is not human subjects research. If it's not human subjects research, this is where you stop on the form. If it is, we will continue. Study record. This is a larger document that you attach all of those individual attachments to that I previously went over. If you have multiple human subjects projects associated with your grant, you'll have an individual study record for each. So sometimes you'll have multiple, sometimes you'll only have one study record to attach. So going into the study record form, it looks like this. This is where you're going to fill out all of the information we went over for your study. You'll have a study title. You can copy the study title you have from your IRB protocol and approval if you have that. Otherwise, you can use your grant title or whatever title you plan to use for your human subject study. Again, it'll ask if your project has any exemptions, yes or no, and which exemption, if it's applicable. Your clinical trial questionnaire. This is the questions I was referring to that will help you identify if you need to fill out the section 4 if your project is an applicable clinical trial. So you'll answer, does the study involve human participants, yes or no? Are the participants prospectively assigned to an intervention, yes or no? Is the study designed to evaluate the effect of the intervention on the participants, yes or no? And is the effect that will be evaluated a health-related biomedical or behavioral outcome? If you answer yes to these questions, you need to complete section 4. Similarly, if you already have a clinicaltrials.gov identifier, so you have already attached your study or uploaded your study to clinicaltrials.gov, you can provide that NCT number here. If you don't yet have your trial listed in clinicaltrials.gov, you don't have to list it here yet. Study population. So you'll list whatever condition or focus area you're looking at for your study. Your eligibility criteria. You'll list what criteria your participants have to meet to apply or to qualify for your study. Your age limits. And this is where you attach those documents we went over, those 7 attachments, your inclusion of individuals across the lifespan. You will simply add attachment, and then you will see it show up here with whatever you have that PDF titled. You'll fill out these 3 attachments that we went over. Your recruiting status. Are you currently recruiting? Are you not yet recruiting? Have you completed recruitment? Or whatever of these apply. Your study timeline attachment that we went over will be applied here. Enrollment of first participant. So if you've actually enrolled a participant, or if it's anticipated. When do you anticipate enrolling your first participant? These are the inclusion enrollment reports that we discussed. You'll click Add Inclusion Enrollment Report. This will take you down here. You'll give a title to your inclusion enrollment report. Typically, I have this title match the study title at the top. Are you using an existing data set or a resource? So are you using enrollments that you don't actually prospectively enroll but have already been previously enrolled? What is the location? List any countries involved, the locations. And this is where you can see that planned enrollment table. Well, you will essentially guess or make an educated assumption of what the racial categories you will enroll for your study. As you add numbers here, you'll see the total add up over here. This number will be your total enrollments for your study. Then you will get this cumulative table. If this is an initial grant application, you will not fill this table out. You will fill this table out for any annual progress reports or a final progress report for your trial. You will continue to section 3, which is the protection and monitoring plans. So this is that large protection of human subjects attachment that you will attach. You'll have to identify if you are enrolling at multiple sites or just one. Now, an additional attachment, if you are enrolling at multiple sites, what is your single IRB plan? Or are you going to have multiple IRB reviews? You'll have to add that attachment here if you are enrolling at multiple institutions. That data and safety monitoring plan you'll attach. Will a data and safety monitoring board be appointed for this study? So that is where you are determining if you have a formal data and safety monitoring plan that involves a data and safety monitoring board. Usually, if your study involves more than minimal risk to participants, then you'll add the document of your overall structure of the study team, so everybody who is listed as a key personnel on your grant. This is section 4. The section you complete if you have an applicable clinical trial. You'll give a detailed description of what your study design is, the primary purpose, the treatment, prevention, diagnosis, whichever is applicable for your study. You will add your interventions. You'll likely have more than one intervention if you have a control, if you have multiple different interventions you're looking at. Your study phase, so if it's a phase 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, or if it's not applicable, if it's not a phase study. You'll have to determine if it is an NIH-defined phase 3 clinical trial. If this is accurate for your study, you will know that answer and you'll be able to choose appropriately. Intervention mode. So what is your design of your study? If you are masking or blinding anybody involved on the study, whether it's the participants, the study team, your allocation. So are participants randomized or are they not randomized for your trial? You'll have to detail the outcomes. So what outcomes are you shooting for your study? Here's the additional attachments of your statistical design and power, the duration for your participants on the study. You'll also have to include an attachment and information if you have an FDA regulated intervention. So IP, IND, or IDE. If your applicable clinical trial is under FDAA, your dissemination plan will be attached. And then any other clinical trial relevant attachments, if you have any that need to be shared with the NIH funding agency. And then that is the study record. You'll fill the study record form out for every study component. If you have multiple studies within your grant that involve human subjects, you'll fill this paperwork out for each. And then on your main document, you'll add that for each. So if you need to add a new study, you'll have one for each. And then you'll save this document and upload it to this document as this attachment. And that is how you complete the NIH human subjects and clinical trial information. Now, I'm not going to go into any more depth on the individual attachments or information because that is very specific to each individual project and how you fill out those attachment documents and how you answer those questions. So again, what questions do you guys have for me?
I can get started here with a question from the chat. Could you please explain what a single IRB attachment is? Is that just part of our IRB application or the entire thing?
Yes. So if you have a project that is enrolling human subjects at multiple institutions. So for example, if you are enrolling patients from a healthcare institution, but you are also enrolling students from a university. So you're enrolling human subjects at 2 different locations that have 2 different IRBs. You can either make a decision if one of the IRBs will act as a single IRB for the whole study. If that is the plan, then you will just create a document detailing whichever institution is going to act as a single IRB and how you will disseminate those IRB approved documents, approved plans, and how you will train both study teams at the 2 different institutions on all of the human subjects protections, designs, and safety for your study. Or if your trial is going to have individual review from each institution, then you'll just detail that as well. Are there any other questions in the chat, Mark?
No, but there's one point of clarification. Comment is that compensation is never a benefit of research and should not be included as a benefit. That's from Michelle Bowles.
Thank you, Michelle. If you guys think of any questions after this recording or this training, feel free to shoot me an email. My email is attached to that presentation. And I'm happy to answer any questions after, if you think of any, as you're filling the paperwork out or after this call.
Yeah, and then Miranda, just a logistic point. You'll be able to get me the slides with this information?
Yes, Mark.
Okay, and then so I'll create the video, and then on the website, the videos will be alongside the slides, and I think the actual video itself should be on YouTube, and in the description there should be a link to the slides from there. So another question from the chat: when will this recording be made available? I believe I should be able to get it up by the end of tomorrow, so Friday afternoon.
Great. Unless there are any other questions, I'll give you all time back to your day.